share it or cool. So thanks guys for joining us for a UX coffee chat. Hope everyone has coffee or tea or whatever is their favorite drink. We're gonna dive in. So we are super excited about this series. It's part 2 of a 4-part series. We're gonna be talking about making our case studies scannable and what goes into that. But before we start, I wanted to do some quick introductions for those who don't know us. My name is G. I graduated the UX bootcamp last May, and I got this job around August. And ever since then, I've just been helping other junior designers kind of navigate the job search and hopefully help them land the role. And I think a few months ago, Karen actually approached me to do like a little partnership, and that's how we created UX Coffee Chat. And we thought it was amazing because it gives a very unique perspective into the recent bootcamp newbie and also the recruiter who discovered her. So I'm going to pass it on to Karen.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So excited that you are all here. This is our second series of a 4 series because we love case studies so much and portfolios. So that's why we decided to make it longer. So yeah, second, there's 2 more coming up. Both of them are in the flyer. I can't remember the dates right now, but I think it's like in the next 2 weeks we have another one. So keep an eye out for those. Hopefully you all can join. So they're going to be they get more and more awesome, I feel like. But that's because I'm biased, right? Because we're doing them. But so just so you know, those are coming up. Okay, so I'm Karen Medina. I've been at NAV for about 4 years, a little bit over 4 years. And I started hiring for UX designers since I started at NAV. So I've been doing it for 4 years. So I feel like I learned the hard way because I feel like I saw over hundreds and hundreds of case studies and resumes and portfolios. So I've learned to train my brain really well, my eye on like what we're looking for and what's important, what matters, what doesn't. So this is why G and I thought this would make sense for us to have that partnership and really help as much as we can. Any junior designers are just getting into it that have questions, or anybody that's really just wants to make any updates right in their portfolio because things change rapidly. So yeah, I think that's all that I wanted to say about me really quick. Yeah, I'll send the mic back to G.
So the problem that we wanted to talk about today, we want to talk about how to solve, is the scannability issue we all run into. So I don't know about everyone else, but for me, when I was working on my case study, I put in all the information, all the context, everything I worked on, the affinity map, the wireframes, and then I ended up with this case study that was so overwhelming. The hiring managers and recruiters, they couldn't extract the information quickly enough, and what did they do at the end? They were like, oh no, this is too much, next. So we're trying to prevent that and trying to pick out like things that we can control and things that we can play around in order to help. The idea behind this, and I'll be talking about like visual hierarchy, visuals using images, like descriptive title, highlighting, bolding, all that fun stuff. And the idea behind this is it is going to be fairly simple. It's going to be covering everything in more of a high level, like I guess the basic building blocks of things. And it's hopefully to help you guys, like when we look at other people's portfolio, and the first thing we think is like, wow, this is nice, it's pretty, wow, I can easily understand what they're talking about. But until we understand what they did, how they did it, and why they did it, we won't be able to take that and implement it into our case studies. So hopefully I'm going to be breaking down everything in like the design aspects of what we can do, and hopefully with this basics you can kind of take it back to your case study and really play around with things that we're going to be talking about to make it more scannable. And so first, Carrie wanted to share some like really important things about like things like details and stuff like that, and then we'll go down and break down those design aspects.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm a visual person, so I am gonna pull up, share my screen really quick. So I'm gonna share with you a portfolio case. And I don't know if any of you were able to come to our other sessions, but we usually pull the same portfolio for one of our UX designers here at NAV as well. Her name is Tiani, so this is just a different case that I'll talk about. So that way, we have different ones that we show. Okay, so then everybody can see my screen, right? We're good. We're in the. It's good. Okay, cool. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the length, about how much detail, about how much is too much, and how a recruiter would scan the project, right? So how I do it. Doesn't mean that everybody does it the same, but that's how I do it. And that's how I've hired a few UX designers. So it's just what I've been doing. So yeah. So how much detail do you need? And I know that I contradict myself every time I talk about detail because for me as a recruiter, I don't need a lot of detail, right? I just need to know that you're telling me the right story. I just need to know like that you're telling me what you're solving for, what the problem was, and what was the solution, right? Like that's really what I need to know. But you do need detail because you have to make sure that the next person after me is the one that's getting the detail, right? Which that would be the hiring manager or the team of designers. So it's like a little balance, but I'll go a little bit about what I'm talking about here. So here, right, you can see her titles. I'm like, okay, I know what this is, the background. I'm like, okay, awesome. She's telling me a little story about what's important here. She's telling me about the problem, what she's going to be trying to solve for in this case study. And the way that I'm going over this case study, it's really sometimes how I scan them, really, because sometimes there's days that we have over hundreds and hundreds of people that apply, so I don't have time to see them all. So that's why I have to go quick, okay? So keep that in mind. The way that I'm talking about it is usually a mix. Like sometimes I go faster, sometimes I go slower, but it's usually about a mix of how I scan a portfolio, okay? So here she has more details. Also, like her coloring, right? Like right here, she has yellow here, her image as well. So everything just kind of goes together. It's easier for me as a recruiter. I'm not a designer by trade, just by passion. Yes, I love it. But it's just easier for me to follow along, right? Especially when I've been sitting for hours looking at portfolios and resumes. I just need something easy to help me follow along. Okay, so here we're going. She tells me about competitive analysis. As you can tell, and this is going to sound a little harsh, but I promise it's not. I'm just giving you my honest feedback. But I'm not reading this. I'm just going to like, okay, awesome. I don't need to know all these details, but I can see and I can understand that this is a competitive analysis, right? I can see all of this is a competition and I can see what happened here. So I'm like, okay, cool. But I'm not looking into it, and that's okay because I don't need to really follow along and understand this, but the hiring manager does, right? And the team does. And also when I am asking you, and I'll talk about this in the next session that we have, but when I talk about the interview itself, I do need to know this. So I am gonna, like I usually ask, like, tell me about this case study, right? Walk me through your thought process. So that's when you'll need all of those details. So maybe I don't read them right away, but we will after, so don't worry. Okay, and then right here she talks about user interviews, which is very, very important as well, because that shows me as a designer, I used to think that it was just beautiful copy and beautiful design, but it's definitely more than that. It's really like a whole thought process, right? Of like what makes sense and why we need to build what and for who and why does it matter, right? So this is what it's telling me without me reading anything. As I'm saying it aloud, that's really how I look at portfolios. So I'm like, I'm not reading it, but this is my thought process behind like, okay, this is what this tells me, that that you do have to do, user interviews. So you really understand your customer and really what you're doing. Talks about, the goals, the frustration, opportunities, which I love. Just defining this for me. I'm like, okay. Also a persona. I love a persona because this shows me that she really understands her customer, her target market, because sometimes you can build the most beautiful and amazing stuff, but if you don't know, or if you're unsure of who are you building that for, or what does your customer like, or what they look like, then it doesn't matter, right? So you have to like really understand, like, okay, what am I trying to accomplish with what I'm designing? Like, what does it matter and for who? So keep that in mind. I love that. Also building unique friendly community. She has information here. More talks about the homepage, how she's gonna set it up. So I'm like, okay, I can follow along. And again, right, like I'm not reading the details, but I'm reading the big. I'm like, okay, like I'm still understanding the story. So make sure that you're able to share that story with your design. She talks about wireframing here. I do love a good story when it comes, and sometimes some of the ones that I've seen as well, they have handwritten designs. So if you have those as well, I love those. Those are awesome. You should definitely add them because it's just cool. It's really cool to understand the thought process that you have as a designer to bring your customer along, which in this case would be me and the team, right? To get you to interview with us. So right here you can see no color, right? She's just starting. She talks about how she modified it. And sometimes, and this is really cool just to see this. This is rare that I see in a portfolio, but I love this because it shows me that you're willing to make your changes, right? And to see what changed, because sometimes things change. Sometimes you do have to make updates and modify it, and based on the market, right? And based on what you need and based on your findings. So this is what that's telling me, again, without me reading all the details. Okay, so it's really interesting. Okay, and then again, it could just be me because I look at a lot of these, but that's just how we read it there. And then right here, you can see that she's starting to add a little bit of color, which we saw the final result on top, and then you'll see it again. Mock-ups here, and here they are to see how we're doing, right? So again, she's telling me her story. I didn't have to read any of the details. It doesn't mean that I won't ask you about it later, but just for me, for the first, 60 seconds that I have on your portfolio, that's all that I need. Okay. So more information, should love, what is it gonna look like after? And then she tells me about her reflection and her next steps. Also, if you do have something that talks about percentages, like let's say that you're like, I don't know, 50% of customers were satisfied based on research, right? Something like that. That also comes a long ways, but when there's something just still going on, this is fine. This is perfect as well. Make sure you do finish it with something like this. Make sure you finish with like a learning, what you solved. Even if you didn't solve for anything, you added, because it tells me that you were able to connect all of your dots together, right? Towards the end. Like, okay, you did it for a purpose. You didn't just do it for, for the heck of it, which sometimes you can, but when you're looking for a job, maybe not the right story. But if you wanted to do it for something else, it's perfect. Okay. So I think that's all that I wanted to go over with you all really quick about how I look at a case. That's really how I look at it. I feel like sometimes I even go faster just because I've seen so many that my eyes are like next, right? Like I like it or I don't like it. And I usually know if I like it or not in the first 30 seconds of looking up your case, just based on how you set it up and based on how well you're able to tell me a story without me reading all of it, right? Like, because it later comes up. And then also, it's helpful for me to show this to the hiring manager and to the team after I interview you and we talk about this, so that way it helps me sell you even better. I know the word sell sounds weird, but really I'm your cheerleader and we're here as a team, and I'm like, like my job is to get you to the next level with the hiring manager and with the team. So yeah, so there's that side. So I'm gonna send it back to G so we can do some life changes as well, and you can all see that.
Thanks, Karen. So yeah, as you can see, it's super, super quick. And like Karen said, the hiring managers might look into more details because they are designers and they're looking for specific things. But the recruiter, being the front line of their defense, that's the first person that's why I like to say Karen discovered me, because she did. But for them, like,
Yes.
they quickly gather what we're trying to say, the important things, in like literally a second, a half second. So our goal is, how do we allow them to extract the important information without having to read the big blobs of paragraphs in the copies that we provide, right? There are a couple of things that go into it. Visual hierarchy will play a very, very big role. And I'm only going to go over very high level because all of these are like a rabbit hole, but I do suggest for you guys to familiarize yourself with it, to research a little bit into it, because if you get very good at visual hierarchy, overall that's going to make you a better visual designer, a better UX, and also a UI designer. So this is a picture I found while doing my research when I was building my portfolio. And this pretty much sums up what visual hierarchy is. Visual hierarchy is playing with a couple of things, which is scale, spacing, contrast, grouping. and kind of we are pretty much designing things so that we lead the user's eyes where we want them to go first, second, third, and fourth. So for example, when we design this, let's say, right now the user, their eye is going to go here first, and then they're going to read this second, and then they're going to read this third, and lastly they're going to read this up here. And this is very intuitive for us. When we look at it, that's how we look at it. Now, to pick apart why, right? So a couple of things that go into it, like scale. This is the biggest thing. It is the contrast. So it has the white background and the black font versus, these sections have the blue and the white. There's grouping, like grouping this together, right? This is one group, that's another group. So a lot of things go into creating this successful visual hierarchy, and that's something that I wanted to break down first. So in order to break it down, we needed a bad portfolio to take a look at, but we didn't want to find a random one and put them on blast. So I created a bad version of T's portfolio, which is right here. So as you can tell, this is pretty much how my first case study looked like. It was horrible. It's super overwhelming. And Karen, what would you do if you open up a case study and this is the first thing you saw?
I would move on really quick.
It's
yeah, because I look a lot. Yeah, because I look at a lot of them. That's the reason, right? Because I'm like, if they all look like this, it makes sense. But if they don't, I can't. I have to move on quick.
Yeah. So we are trying to communicate a lot of information here, and we just kind of listed it all out, and it's a lot, and I don't even want to read this, and I created this. So how do we make this more scannable? The first thing, the easiest thing we control actually is the margin. So it's very hard for our eyes to move left to right when it's very long. So if you look at really good websites, you'll notice that they shorten their margin so that our eyes don't have to track left to right. So imagine reading a book that is 1 feet long. That's insane. You would have to physically move yourself and inch yourself to read from left to right, right? So in order to make it easy, we can play around with the margin. So just by making it just a little bit shorter, it makes it way easier for our eyes to move left to right, especially for those who are working with really big monitors. So Karen, I don't know what your monitor size is, but as a designer, they sent me a 27-inch monitor. That's wide. And
yes.
yeah, in order for me to read left to right in a full margin, I would literally have to move my head. There's no way I can read that in my peripherals. So play with your margins, make it just enough to give you space to fit everything in, but small enough so that the eyes can quickly scan left to right.
Even that makes the margin alone makes a huge difference. And I in the past I would have never noticed nor cared, but since it's been a few years now, it's like that little things, right? That my eye goes directly to it, and it's like, okay, even that minor. I know it seems like a minor change, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, our job is to make it easier for them, right? Why are we making it harder for our users to read through our case studies? Okay, so from here, the first step I'm going to do is playing around with the visual hierarchy. I want to set my goal. So what do I want them to see first? Now, every case study is going to be a little bit complex, so that's going to change. It's never going to be the same. But for simplicity reasons, for this section, I want them to see the titles first. So the goal, user research, problem, and assurance. Why? Is because I want to give them a context of what the next paragraph is going to be, right? So I want them to know when they're reading this, they're reading the problem. When they're reading this, they're reading the goal. So the very first thing I can do is I can change the size of it. Where are you? So I can make the headers a little bit bigger. So now you can see a little bit of contrast. Again, contrast being a part of the visual hierarchy, but it's quite not there yet. Let's take it a little bit further and let's make it bold. So now playing with the weight of the font, now we made even more of a contrast. So now we can really clearly tell between the header and the copy. So now the next step is it's looking very cluttered, and spacing is super, super important, right? Because our eyes need to breathe. So I want to read the problem, have a little bit of break, read the body, and then have a break before I read the next section, right? Or else when you clump it all together, it's becomes very overwhelming. And after 100 portfolio, once it's a little bit overwhelming, I would assume, Karen, that you'd be like, I can't do this. Like, I gotta go. I'm gonna buy myself some coffee and move on.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
Yeah, so let's avoid that, right? Let's get a job. So let's give a little bit of spacing between the header and the body. So let's do where are you? 5, 6. Okay, so let's put a little bit of spacing. And then if you can see, there is the spacing between the body and the header is the same between each section. And that's also makes it a little bit busy because now I can tell the difference between the header and the body, but I can't quite really distinctively tell the difference between each section because they're all merging together. So let's give it a space between each section. See, now we give a breathing room for the eye, and now we can clearly, in a half a second or less, understand that this is now talking about the problem. This is a separate section, that's a separate section, and that's a separate section. So spacing is a very powerful tool, and honestly, it took me forever to learn that. But yeah, it definitely utilized spacing between, give the eyes a break, because after looking at it for so long, I'm pretty sure sometimes like we'll see doubles. So so give it a
Yes. Yeah, especially like keeping like yes, spacing is a huge thing. Especially, I mean, you all saw the case that I just showed you, right? Like it's so long. Like I don't have time to read through through all of it. That's why the space is so important to be like, okay, this is a problem. This is a goal. This is what's next, right? So it's really, really important. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like if someone's about to tell you a 5-minute story long and they don't take any breaks, no pauses, no breath, no breathing, and then after all you're like, whoa, slow down. Same thing in a visual way. I wanted to go back actually to the like the visual hierarchy of making the, for this instance, the problem pop out. So there is everything that I'm going to be talking about. There are a limited amount of ways to achieve the goal, right? So the goal right here is making the problem, this little statement, this little header pop out. This time I used big and bold, but you can also use contrast in terms of colors, right? So if I go back a step, I kept it the same size. I bolded it, and just by changing the colors, now you can differentiate between the header and the body. So there's multiple ways. You can use highlighting. I think people use like a bottom highlighting, whichever way. There are so many different ways to do it. It's not just about making it bold and making it bigger. Now, okay, I've separated this. Now, in terms of like grouping, so grouping is also a very big part of visual hierarchy. It's like if you go into your music app, whether it's YouTube or Apple Music, imagine if they didn't separate it by genre or artist or anything. You just see a big blob of all the music you can possibly find that exists in the world. That's a lot. But they use grouping, so they grouped it between genres, they grouped it between albums and songs. Those grouping is what helps us understand the context and be able to gather the information. So here, this right here, these three belongs in one group because that's like the introduction. And then from here on out, now you're only seeing user research because I created like a bad version, but obviously for your case studies, you're going to have a lot more information that comes after this. This here on out is a separate group because now you're going into the production of the product, right, in the process. So this is introduction. Now that's starting to go into the product. So I want to take a step further and group it out even more. So I'm gonna do a black background. Again, there's a million ways to do it. For this specific instance, I'm gonna use a contrasting background to really separate that. And also notice that I gave even more spacing. So I gave an ample amount of space on top and I gave an ample amount of space on the bottom. So now the eye is saying, okay, that's one group, break, right? Break. Okay, now the second group is starting. But you know what? Let's take it a little bit step further. I feel like it's a little bit bland. I really want this to pop out because I really want it to be like, all right, now here is the start of me creating this product. So I'm going to use more contrasting. I'm going to use color. So now that I changed this color to yellow, now it's probably the first thing they'll see is insurance problem goal, and then, oh, this is different, it's a different color. Okay, now this is starting a different section, a different group. So this is all pretty much visual hierarchy. And again, this is kind of going on a very high level. The more you work on your case study, the more you'll know if things get complicated, maybe you want to highlight different things.
Mhm.
I'm going to show a couple of examples about that later.
Yeah. And then make sure that your color also matches your theme. Like it's fun, it's great to play with colors, but make sure it comes all with your theme. It comes together because sometimes you might have random ones that make no sense, but make sure like those little things align as well, right? They come along with like, oh, I already have this color, so I'm gonna use this color compared to like that. I can't look at it. Don't give me those.
Like
So yeah.
yeah, that's a very good point, because that kind of goes into like keeping it clean and organized, which I'll go into like at the end. Yes, if it's too much going on, it's a lot. It's a lot for the eyes. And again, that's probably one of the many ways where a recruiter will say next. So keep
Mhm.
everything consistent. And that's why like we like about teas is that it is yellow, it's blue, and she'll use that throughout. But then this black and the yellow is consistent with the rest of her portfolio. So she
Mhm.
uses a lot of consistency. Okay, so now another thing I want to talk about is the font. When I was doing my first project, I fell in love with the font and I used it, and it was not legible. It's hard, right? So make sure that the font is legible. If you Google like the most, legible font, it'll like a bunch of them pop up. Things like probably Arial, like Helvetica, and a bunch of stuff. It's another rabbit hole, but I do suggest that you familiar yourself with typography and what makes it legible and what makes it not. But here's a really good example of a font that just does not work, will not work. Please don't do it.
I
Like
cannot. I will move on real quick.
yeah, like Joanna just like, squinted and moved in. Yes, we want to avoid that. So make sure that the font you use is for sure legible. Okay. And then now moving on. All right, cool. So now we've made a visual hierarchy. We highlighted all the things we need. The problem we still have is when Karen is skimming through this, she really still has no idea what the problem is unless she reads all of this. And, probably 0% of her reading it. It's likely. So our
There's a
next,
small chance. There's a small chance.
okay, like a one, yeah, let's not bank on that. So now our next step is how do we allow her to extract what we're trying to, like the most important thing we're trying to talk about, which is the problem, without her having to read all of this. And that kind of goes into bringing the most important thing first and center. And there are a million ways to do it. I'm only going to be talking about like one of the few ways to do it, and I'll kind of show a little bit more examples. But one of the ways we did it, and I personally did this on my portfolio, is using descriptive headers or statements. So, for example, right now it says the problem, but that's only giving me context. It's not really stating what the actual problem is. So I want to change that into a more descriptive header. So now I change it to insurance is too complicated and confusing. So if someone is skimming through this and they scroll down, they don't even have to read all of this to understand what the problem I'm trying to solve, right? Because it's big and bold. And then kind of going back into visual hierarchy, notice that now, because since I want this to be the first thing they see, I made this the biggest, the boldest, and so your eyes will go here first. But I still wanted to give them a context that this section here is talking about the problem. But the problem was no longer the first thing I wanted to see. So I made it smaller. I made the contrast less. I made it less contrast. So I made it lighter. So it's still there. It's just your eyes probably won't go to it first. Maybe you'll go to it second or maybe third. So visual hierarchy. And also notice that since this got bigger, I added more space in between here. And then I added more space in between here. So difference between this, right? A little bit of space and this. Well, that's not working. All right. And this. So yeah, the amount of space that you give adapts to what information you have, what's the sizes and what's everything around it. All right, so now I have a descriptive title. Cool. Now I say, what I want to say first thing. Now, the other issue that I always ran into and a lot of people ask me about was sometimes we have to have a paragraph. Sometimes it's unavoidable, especially when we're telling, the story of what happened, how things progressed, and blah, blah, blah. So if that's the question, how do we allow them to read through the paragraph and pick out the most important things? And one of the many ways is bolding. You can either bold, you can highlight. I've seen some people underlined. You can just change the color, whichever way it works. But highlighting what the most important things is a very simple way. Like, for example, here I bolded complicated, confusing, boring, very expensive, and increasing pay. So if they just want to skim through this and they read these three things,
That's perfect. That's perfect. I will read that. Yes.
Yeah, it's enough, right? It's just enough information. Now, if you're going to do this, you need to make sure that it is the most important thing you're bolding. For example, if I took out everything else, if I deleted everything else, can they still understand what I'm trying to say here? Yes, I'm literally pointing out the problem. Now, if I bold out when we talk about insurance, and let's say we got rid of everything else, is it still saying the same thing? No, because now they're going to read when we talk about insurance, and you're like, all right, well, what about it? What about like talking about insurance, right? So you want to make sure that you bold the most important thing. And sometimes it is very hard. It is very hard to figure out what is the most important thing. So having a third eye or taking a break and coming back with a fresh eye really does help. Another thing is don't bold too much, because once you bold a lot of them, now you pretty much got rid of the visual hierarchy, and now it blends in all together. Pretty much, you might as well not bold anything, right? So make sure when you bold, it is just enough for them to pick up the most important thing. All right, so let's say you bolded everything, but then sometimes we think that we need a paragraph, but we really don't. It can be shortened. And it's hard sometimes because, especially when you're looking for like hours and hours, days after days, weeks after weeks, it's hard to pick out what's not important, what's important. So my what really worked for me is my coach forced me to take a break. So I took a break on the weekend, over the weekend. And then when I came back and I read it, I was like, why did I write this? Like, that's not important. So it helped me shorten all of my copies of my text. So for example, here, let's do this. So example here, we can get rid of a lot of the filler words that make this very big. Things like, when we talk about insurance, like many customers found, and we found, another issue, we found, all of that are repetitive. It's filler words and it's not necessary. So we can take this entire paragraph and we can shorten it to 3 sentences. So many customers found that insurance is too complicated, confusing, boring. So I pretty much combined 2 of my sentences together. They found it to be expensive and a constant increase in pay. And then I ended it with bringing it all together. A combination of these resulted in them leaving the website without signing up for any insurance. Now my big old sentence, my big old paragraph became very short, very to the point. And really going through your entire case study with a fresh eye or a third eye and figuring out like what's too much information, what's repetitive, what's filler, what's important is super helpful in making it more scannable. The thing is, like, if whoever's scanning this, whether it's a hiring manager, recruiter, after they read this, if they want a little bit more context, they would want to read this. And so we still want to make that easier for them. Okay, so that's how to make it shorter. Another way is bulletin. It works for some, it works for others, but it is a good way in displaying multiple amounts of information. So now if you bulletin it out, it's super easy to digest and to, like, the thing about our brain is that after a while, as long as we're fluent in the language and it is our primary, our brain no longer has to read letter by letter. Just by seeing a pattern of the different letters put together, our brain would automatically instantaneously pick up the word, right? It's not reading anymore. Now it's just about I forgot the word they use, but it's like a whole science thing. So that's the point of the bulletin. They don't have to read. They're literally skimming and the brain would automatically pick up the words. And then now a 3 second of reading turns into a 1.5 second of just registering the words. So that's another great way of doing it. So yeah, those are the couple of ways that you can make the most important things like front and center, right? Making a descriptive title, utilizing your visual hierarchy, bulleting, bolding, highlighting anything that's important. Another thing we can do is using visuals. So one thing that I learned at the end was always literally going through every single little section, like this section, that section, this section, and asking myself, how can I display this in a visual way where they don't have to read, but they can still extract the information?
And make yourself follow along your story, because you can add any images, but if they don't make sense, doesn't matter, right? Like you're gonna distract from the following along. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, like the images and the visuals needs to correlate to what you're trying to say, right? If it's a random, it's pretty much useless and you're wasting real estate.
Yes.
Um, so it can be either images or it can be charts, it can be quotes, you can get creative. One thing I love, like what T did, was right here. So again, utilizing visual hierarchy, the first thing we see is when we talk about insurance. So okay, well, that's going to be the problem. And then she like clustered the word, right? So she's using text but in a very visual way. And then again, using more visual hierarchy, she's highlighting the most important things. So complicated, confusing, boring, expensive. And then the secondary thing is, how to choose, no response, and blah, blah, blah. So that's a very creative to do it. Another way, this is the way I did it for one of my sections for my portfolio. This is a user interview. So I used visual hierarchy again. I want them to see the title first. And then the second thing is I want them to see my biggest finding. So I use a descriptive titles, understanding what they want through user interview. So they're like, oh, cool, she did interview and she understands why she's doing an interview, is to understand that, right? Also, I gave them breaks for their eyes. And now here, at first I had a paragraph and then I had a bulletin and then I switched to this. This, in my opinion, what I thought it did, or what I hope it succeeded, was that the second thing they see in this entire section is my biggest finding. So they don't need to read this. They don't even need to read this. And automatically they will understand that I did use an interview. I understand why I did interview and what was the biggest problem I was solving for. Now, if they want to go in a little bit deeper into details, they know that I had 6 other findings. Maybe they don't even want to know the other findings. Maybe they just want to know, like, I had other findings. It wasn't just one simple, it was multiple of them. And then if they want to go a little bit deeper, again, using visual hierarchy with the bolding and the contrast, on a high level, they know shame and fear, not aware of spending, okay, still wants to live life, blah, blah, blah. So that's how visually displaying your information really helps, because it helps break apart, group the items, and also it helps you make it easy for you to like lead their eyes into the things that you want them to read first, second, third, fourth, and etc. Couple of other examples I found, and these are just some of my like many portfolios that I saved over time. These are good things. I don't mind putting them on blast. So this is Simon Chan's case study for Amazon, and he again displayed the information in a visual way. Again, using visual hierarchy. You just understand the high level. So streaming to save, show me you know me, collectors listen more, and then the images do correlate. So chances are the hiring managers are visuals. So just by visually seeing this, they'll be able to connect this and then understand. They don't necessarily need to read this to know the story. So that is a very successful visual hierarchy and making it scannable. Another way is, this is going back into a descriptive title, which I think this person did it amazingly. And I stole it from my case study. So in my case study, you'll see this too. So this says iterate, iterate, iterate. So instead of saying wireframes, user testing findings, or whatever is like your basic I guess like the common titles, iterate, iterate, iterate says so many things. One is that yes, now this entire section is all about iterating, but this also tells us that she knows it's important to constantly improve, constantly to get findings, constantly to like change it, right? And that's a very big part of UX design. That is really what makes UX design versus a web designer or an app designer. So just by this, 4 words, well, 4 words and a little comma, just by that, I'm extracting so much information, right? Beautiful. It's amazing, honestly. And then as we go down, she puts improve the data we provide, improve navigation. So by here, I know that now she's improving specific features, and I get to understand the features of the app. I don't have to read all of this if I don't want to. I'm gathering that she iterated, and she proved these features. And that is that's a combination of very good visual hierarchy and then grouping the informations together and a descriptive title. So yeah, that's an amazing example. Another example is you can use videos and prototypes. So this one, she is displaying a GIF of her prototype. And then again, I'm going to be harping on visual hierarchy a lot. Visual hierarchy, she puts O1 search experience. Okay, so that's the search experience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to read this to understand that that's the search experience.
I love this images. I wouldn't expect it from a junior designer right away, but if they have it, super plus. But definitely from like a more senior designer, right? But I love this so much. I just love it because you can see the prototype, you can see how it's working, you can see what change, what's going on next. So it's really awesome to see things like that for sure.
It also doesn't have to be for a prototype either. This person put a GIF of her putting an affinity map together. So without having to read the map, we can already extract that this is how her brain works. She's grouping, she's constantly looking, she's analyzing, she's, doing X, Y, Z.
I
So
love I love this. I talked about this in past sessions that I'm a sucker for any sticky note anything image. Because of that, right? Because of the thought process. Because it's like, yeah, I don't need to be a designer, but I can see and I can imagine you doing your full on research, like really understanding the problem, really understanding the client, and like executing in the way that you need to in order for to succeed. So it's really cool.
I was so jealous when I saw this. I was like, that's beautiful. I can't.
Same, and I'm not even a designer. I was like, this is so cool.
Another example I wanted to show is charts, Venn diagrams, or I don't exactly know what this is named, but it's also a really good way to cluster information quickly. I can see, okay, she has business goals, she has user goals, and there's the in between. So I don't need to necessarily read all of this, but I understand that she understands there's more than just like my problem, right? There's a complexity behind it. Sometimes a UX designer, their solutions will coincide with the business goals, and the fact that she understands that is really awesome. So just without having to read all of this, I can extract the information. The last thing I wanted to show is I thought whoever did this is amazing. Really a good combination of visual hierarchy plus visuals plus bulleting and clumping everything together. So here she's showing her iterations. Just by looking at this, I know what I'm looking at because it's so organized and it's so well done. So to now pick it apart, what makes it good is one, visual hierarchy, right? She's highlighting the biggest thing. So, okay, removal of bottom navigation, very descriptive. She's not saying iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3. No, just by reading the titles, I already know what this is about without having to read this. Second thing is bulleting. Since you bullet her points, it's easy for me to scan through what I want to read and what I don't want to read. If it's a paragraph, I have to commit to the entire paragraph. If it's a bulletin, I could only commit to this one and understand. Second thing is amazing visuals. So instead of like usually the cookie cutter is you put all of your first what is it set of designs and then some kind of text and then you'll show the second set of designs. This one she decided to show the before and the after so that we can visually see the differences without having to scroll up and down to compare. And the last thing I thought was super clever is that instead of using copy like a before after, she uses a visual, so an arrow, and just by using the arrow I can instantaneously know that it's a before and after. So this is like a combination of pretty much everything I talked about, and it's done so well. Plus a good amount of spacing. It flows well. It's beautiful, and then also all the highlighting. To Karen's point, her colors are consistent throughout, so I know what to expect. So these are some examples that I thought was done really great. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I know we're almost running out of time. I do want to open up for questions. Was keeping it clean and organized. This is a really good example. Number one, again, the colors, the color scheme, the mood, everything is consistent. So consistency is very big on making it scannable because you want to make it clean and you want to make it organized. Another thing is margin. So everything, all the margins are the same. There's none that's like, poking out or inside or anything like that. Another thing is everything is left aligned. So it becomes really messy when, let's say, like this is left aligned and then this is like center aligned, and then next thing you see is right aligned, right? You want to choose one and go with it. Another point is make sure you don't have too many colors and too many fonts. When there's too many colors, it no longer becomes coherent and it becomes very, very overwhelming to the eye. And also having too many font sizes is also very overwhelming. So here she probably only has 3 fonts, right? She has her body font, she has a header font, and then she has her, I don't know what, a subheader. I don't know like official terms. So yeah, she has 3 fonts. Usually 2 fonts is good enough. And then also font sizes. So she has 4 font sizes. Usually 3 to 4 is more than you need. Anything more than that, it becomes very, very incoherent and very hard to read. So she has one size for her really big, high level headers. She has one for the subheaders. She has one for her body. And then she has one for like a smaller header. So that's all you need. So keeping those minimal, smaller really helps in terms of keeping it organized. And the last thing is making sure that we do display the information in a proper order. So for example, if I were building a product and I did this first, second, and third and fourth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's usually how we would tell the story on like how it happened. But I remember like, I don't know, waking up one day and I decided to get really super creative, and then I did this, and then all of a sudden my story went from telling the fourth to the second to the third to the first, and the viewer no longer was able to follow my train of thought because it was jumbled around. So keeping your information organized and figuring out what you really want to tell first, second, third, and fourth is a really big part of making it scannable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, those are all the points that I wanted to make, and I hope that those were useful, and I hope you guys extracted a lot of things from it. But yeah, we only have 10 minutes left. Sorry, it was a little bit long, but I do want to open the floors for any questions anybody has.
We did have a question if you're able to share those portfolios by any chance that you shared.
I'll put it in like a Excel chart and I'll share it in the LinkedIn post.
Okay, perfect.
But yeah, some of these are like really great. Made me feel bad about my portfolio. I remember.
Hey, yours made it. You got an offer. You got an offer. It's okay. Be proud. It passed the Karen check. Perfect. And does anybody have any questions that we can answer for you right now, or if you want us to take a peek at any of your cases, we can do that, or we can do it after. Don't worry. Don't be shy. We'll have 9 minutes. No, you're all good. You're set. And then in the next session, definitely, I think that's the one I'm the most excited about. And I know I said that earlier, but because I'm really going to be talking more about the interview and how you share your story as well when it comes to your cases. And I was going to ask G, like, or any of you, I guess, but do you guys ever forget, right? Because you work in your case studies, but do you forget kind of like your thought process of the story? So that's why I keep saying, make sure you have your problem, what you did, and your solution. Because sometimes in an interview, I can be like, okay, tell me about your favorite one, right? Walk me through it. Or sometimes when I'm like, where I'm not getting the information that I needed, I ask for a second one. So then that's why I'm like, do you as a designer, that's why I'm like, keep your story straight because you might have to share it, right, with the recruiters. So yeah, so keep that in mind. So I don't know if you have it all over, make sure you can follow your story, because that's gonna just set you for your interview in all the rounds, not just in mine in the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many times where I went on my first couple of interviews and they're like, so tell me about your project. And I'm like,
It's like, hold on. And that's why you don't want to have so many, right? That's why you have four or five. You don't want to have 20 cases because then it's like, which one was this one? So yeah.
oh yeah. I guess since no one has any question, I wanted to kind of highlight what Karen was saying before, like early on. She was pretty much saying that we are designing for 2 users, and that's also what makes the case study a little bit more complex and complicated, right? Because when Karen was saying, she doesn't need a lot of details, but the hiring managers do. So those are our 2 users. We are designing for both the hiring manager and both the recruiter, and they are very 2 different users. So for the hiring manager, we need to make it quick, we need to make it scannable, we need to be able for them to understand our story, understand our product, understand the way we think, our brains, our process, all within 30 to 60 seconds. Now in terms of hiring manager, they are going to dig in a little bit more because they are looking for very specific things, or design aspects or whatever it is.
Specific examples as well, like how you got from point A from point B. Why did this work? Why did you not try something else?
Yeah.
So that's why you have to be ready, right? Remember your cases. That's all I'm gonna say, because it's happened where I've asked people and they're like, they go on, and I was like, that's not the one I'm talking about. I'm like, okay. So it happens. I'm just saying, I've seen it. It happens.
Yeah, because like they all, I don't know if anybody's already been in interviews, but the hiring managers will ask you a specific question. Um, why did you decide to design it this way instead of any other solutions? Why did you decide to do this? Or one of the questions I was asked was, why is your requirement for a user someone who's able to use a phone? And to be honest, that kind of had me a little bit stumped because I didn't think about it. And my answers, to be honest, now knowing it didn't make sense. I excluded an entire a pool of users that didn't need to be excluded.
Mm-hmm.
But like really knowing your case study really helps with that. But yeah, so then that's why it becomes a little bit difficult. Where it's like, all right, well, how do we make it scannable at the same time, give it enough information, give it enough context for hiring managers to extract what they need to know. Kevin, I actually have a question. So let's say you had 300 portfolios or 300 applicants. From that 300, how much would you say you would pass on to hiring managers?
That is a loaded question. So now that I've gotten better on my job, I try not to do so many. Out of 300, I probably move on 10 to the hiring manager, if that, because I know, right? Because I work with her enough to know what she likes, what doesn't, right? Like I know the business enough to know what's coming up. So an example, like if somebody has an example of an app, like a very detailed app that I know that we have an app specific thing coming up, like I'm gonna move those forward. So now now because I've gotten better, because usually I would have passed probably 50% of those, which that was crazy. But now that I've gotten better at my job, I usually just move on 10 to the hiring manager, and then from there only the top 2 get moved to the team.
That number is a lot smaller than I thought. I was thinking like 30, 40.
Oh no, girl. I got good. I got good after 4 years.
That's awesome though. So pretty much I was asking because so now a recruiter, let's say, will take a look at 300 portfolios. Obviously, depending on the company, there's more. Like when I applied to Etsy's internship program, there was roughly 1,000 applicants. So making it scannable, making it pretty, making it clean, making it organized is super important. But now the hiring managers are only looking at 10 portfolios. So they are probably going to be able to spend a little bit more time into it. So that makes sense, actually, why they have more time to like look into the details.
Yep. See, now you get it.
Small funnel.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always a full funnel. So we learn through the years. Like I learned, all of you learn to be better and better every day. So good. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can, yeah. Oh, do you have anything else? Sorry.
No, that was it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. I was like, we'll give you 3 minutes back into your life. So we just want to say thank you so much for joining. We will send out the recording after in a few later on today, so you will see it if you want to share it or rewatch it. But we have more sessions, so hopefully you all can join and share it with your friends as well.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.